do it this way around, I think.
Brilliant, Gary.
Here we go.
Thank you. Okay, well, to Gilles and to the section, thank you for inviting me here today to speak. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Gilles has said, I'm going to talk to you. I've got two presentations to give you. The first one is about the PWI. It's not about the presidency, it's about the PWI. I have to confess that I take a lot of pride in wearing this thing around my neck. It's the Presidential Medal. It means a lot to me in terms of my own personal pride in my history as an engineer, but without being too hubristic about it, what I'm actually proud of is that I'm part of a community of engineers that run back a long, long way. This thing was first designed in 1884, and in the back of it are 4 leaves of metal with the names of all of the past presidents engraved on it. It's that community, which includes you as well, who are the infrastructure engineers of the railway, and it's that I'm proud of. My real pride is that the railway, over there somewhere, is the real railway. It has changed the world since the 1830s, and it will continue to do so into the future. So yes, I have some personal ego hubristic pride about wearing this medal, but I wear it for all of the engineers who are involved in engineering. It also gifts me with 1 or 2 little issues that the PWI kind of own, these heirlooms. That's the President's gavel for calling meetings to order. So we are now convened. Those formalities are great. They're history, aren't they? They're history alive, really. But I think what I want to talk to you about as part of this address is how we move forward from that history and how we move the PWI forward in this in the confines of this century. So I put this address together, and I rather pompously entitled it President's Address, but it's really actually about what I believe is the right thing to do for and with the PWI. Now, the presidency is a curious post. It implies, just as the President of the United States in many ways implies that somehow I've got God-given authority to do all sorts of stuff. I haven't in the PWI, I certainly haven't in America. Maybe I'll stand. But anyway, I don't have the authority to change anything. I'm a director of the PWI, but part of the board. And the decisions about what is done are not mine to make. So what you're going to hear today is my opinion and what I'm feeding into the debates about the direction of travel of the PWI. Direction of travel will get defined in a strategic plan, which will be under Stephen Barber's chair as the CEO of the PWI. We'll be having those debates next spring about the next 5 to 10 year plan for where the PWI goes. What I'm talking to you about today is my input to that debate. So, I want to explain to you what I'm trying to do as president of this institution. That, in a way, recognises that I'm doing what I do accountable to you as members. Those of you who are members, those of you who aren't members, join, please. Join, do. Just join. To do that, I want to kind of give you a snapshot of where the PWI is now as a professional institution. Then I'll pick up on where I believe its strengths lie. What are the strengths of the PWI as it exists today? And then what do we do with those strengths to build the capability of the organisation? And finally, I'm going to outline my objectives in that. So, in 2022, where is the PWI? Well, it's in a markedly different position to where it was in 1884. In case any of you can't do the maths, that's nearly 140 years ago. 140 years ago, to remind you what the issues in the railway were, the issues were, should we have interlockings? Should we even have signals? There were some railway companies in 1884 who were under extreme stress from the then Railway Inspectorate to actually implement signalling. Electricity didn't feature much in railways in 1884. There were no colour light signals other than candles behind lenses. There were no electric lights in the signal boxes, they were oil lamps. Trains were lit by gas, if they were lit at all. Most of the trains didn't even have brakes, not even the passenger ones. It was still the aftermath of the Armagh disaster, and not all railways had been persuaded to put brakes on passenger coaches. We're a long way different, is what I'm saying. 1884, our history doesn't matter anymore. What matters is today. Well, in the last 10 years, the PWI have recognised that, because 10 years ago, there was a question about the PWI as an institution. The question was, do we wind it up? Shut it down because it's in financial trouble? It had no funds, it didn't have stable membership, and it looked as if the option was either to change it or shut it. Well, David Packer, who some of you may know that name, some of you may know the man, but David Packer came in as CEO of the PWI, and his first question he was asked was, which way are you going to go? Are you going to wind it up or are you going to make changes to it? It's your decision. Nobody's going to argue with you. David decided to change. And he made some remarkable changes to an institution which was effectively a friendly society. He has turned it across that 5 years of his CEO term. He changed it from being a friendly society into being a professional engineering institution. Among the biggest things he did was get the PWI to a position where it's registered with the Engineering Council as a PEI. In context, that puts us on the same footing as the ICE, the IET and the IMEC-E. We sit on the same level as those organisations. We're nothing like as rich as them, although the IMEC-E appears to be in some financial difficulty with George Street offices that are more expensive than they can afford, even with 137,000 members. So we're, in some ways, we're not as big, we're not as wealthy, but we sit on the same level. We're on the joint board of moderators for engineering degrees. Our technical director, Brian Counter, sits on the joint board of moderators. And that's moved us to a different position. We're also now financially sound. In spite of COVID, our cash balance is very good. We are not under any threat financially. The books balance, and every bit of that cash balance is held either as reserves or invested back into stuff for the membership. We don't have a building. Our operations director, Kate Hatwell, runs the PWI out the front room of her house. That's our address. Our postal address is Kate's house. A bit different to George Street, where the IMechE are. A bit different to the civils, yeah. But nevertheless, we're sound. And we have 3 unique selling points. And that's them up there. We are the only institution which can claim to be focused solely on rail infrastructure. In the ICE, you'll find civil engineers, some of whom are railway engineers and do railway stuff. In the IMechE, you'll find a strong railway division. Actually, it shouldn't be called the railway division, it should be called the trains division. The IMechE are very strong on traction and rolling stock. In the IET, there are 1 or 2 examples of good stuff. Dr. Roger White, who some of us in this room know and greatly respect, does some really good stuff for railway traction. But I defy you in an IET magazine to find much that's been of interest to you in the past 3 years. I defy you to find anything other than the course run by Dr. Roger White that really does much for electrification. We, on the other hand, are rail infrastructure focused. Second, I don't know if any of you in this room have sought to become professionally registered through the IMechE or the IET, but I find their approach rather similar to 1970s bank managers. I remember when I first opened my bank account in the 1970s, I had to sit in front of the manager and really grovel and justify why I deserved to be treated as a customer. Then, the whole process was very intimidating. Have you looked at the IMechE website for registration in IMechE? It's about as helpful as a chocolate fireguard, and it really is quite confusing. The IET one ain't much better. By contrast, the PWI has people who you can ring and ask, what does this mean? Who can talk to me about that? And you will get names of people to talk to. And remember that the professional registration through the PWI has exactly the same weight as registration through any other professional institution. That's our unique selling point in registration terms. But there's a third thing. We offer engineering training and education. So we have lots of training courses for competencies that we offer in track. But we also have 2 engineering diploma courses now running. One for track, which is well established over 6 or 7 years now, and the electrification diploma course, which we're working on to complete. There are 3 modules of it already in place, 2 more to go at least in preparation. We've run the first batch of people through that diploma, and those diplomas, the track and the electrification diploma, get you to level 6, just short of master's degree. That's the next level up. And they are properly accredited through the the academic registration processes, hence our seat on the Joint Board of Moderators. Those are our selling points, those are our strengths. So what do we do to build on those strengths? Well, we need to get new members. We need to do that just to stand still. If you look at the age profile, the demographic of PWI, there are far too many people of my age and not enough of some of yours. We need to recruit new people to join the organisation. So anyone in this room not a member, please remember that message. We need you to join, and we need others to be encouraged to join. We doubly so need to get that recruitment running if we're going to grow. And I don't just mean grow in terms of membership numbers, but I mean grow in terms of capability of services we can provide. The investment made in creating the electrification diploma is not inconsiderable. We pay people to write the course documentation for us. We pay people to do the lectures. We pay for the locations where the lectures are run. It costs money. Yes, okay, it becomes self-sustaining because we charge for the people to attend the courses. But if we're going to make more of it, we need to do more. And so the 2 modules that we add to the electrification diploma, maybe we have other diploma courses that we develop. But the membership is key to that. And new members need a reason to join. Just me saying, come and join, it's a good idea, isn't really washed, does it? It's not good enough. We have to make that, those selling points that I talked about, we have to make those real. We have to make those obvious, and we have to mean what we say. We have to deliver what we say we're going to deliver for people joining. I'm encouraged that there are so many people in the room today, because actually section meetings at PWI 5 years ago were far less well attended than this. This is good to see this many people here, and I'm seeing that. But actually, are section meetings the service you want? Is that what you want the PWI to do? Well, we need to engage with you and understand what you want so that we can gauge how to put the services right for future engineers. So we build on our strengths, is what I'm saying. And we need to broaden our scope. So here is the core of what I'm debating within PWI at board level. We've already set off with the electrification discipline, and I'm very pleased to... oh yeah, sorry, have I done that?
No, I have.
Okay. I'm very pleased that having been invited to take up the presidency, I've been able to help the PWI move forward with making electrification a real viable home for electrification engineers as professional engineers. Very pleased with that indeed. And we're adding conductor rail, 3rd and 4th rail to the diploma course. We will be adding that into our offering. But here's the point. When I speak to people who work in electrification who are not aware of the PWI, I get 2 questions almost routinely if I open that conversation up. The first question is, why are you president of a track organisation? And the second question, so why would I want to join this track organisation? That question comes up time and time and time again. And those questions are a direct result of our name, PWI. It means Permanent Way Institution. And the Permanent Way comes from the original name for the first bit of railway built so that they could construct the railway being converted into something that would stay there permanently. The permanent track was the Permanent Way. We're kind of saddled with that name and saddled with the image. They're a direct result of the institution's name. And our founders were very foresighted, perhaps, or maybe didn't think this through at the time. But they wrote a constitution for the PWI that says we should be interested in everything between the fence lines. Everything between the fence lines. Electrification's clearly between the fence lines. Signalling is clearly between the fence lines. Plant and equipment are between the fence lines. And broadly, if I think about it, our objective is to keep the trains between the fence lines. So why is it not everything on the railway that we're interested in? I'll settle for infrastructure first. So my objectives then, and I'll stop boring you to tears with this in a minute. I want to continue to support the PWI exec in enhancing and consolidating all that stuff and getting the membership activities increased. I want to place the PWI as an organisation that's positively engaged in all engineering disciplines in rail infrastructure. We've already got 2 members who are telecoms engineers. That's promising. I've started to have some conversations with people in the IRSE about what this means. Enough of that for now, those discussions will go on. But I really do believe we should have all infrastructure engineering disciplines represented in our midst. Personally, I try to, not always perfectly, as a visible ambassador of this institution within the industry and wider within government circles and other places. I always make the point, for my sins, I quite often end up speaking to people in the DFT. I always make sure that I ostentatiously tell them that I am the president of the Permanent Way Institution. Does it help? Don't know. It doesn't help if I don't say it, because they won't know it, so it might, so I say it. And I want to do what it says on that last thing there. Promote active and purposeful debate towards a plan over time for this institution to change its name. So instead of just having the infrastructure bit as a strap line, I want the name that trips off the tongue when you talk about this institution to be the Institution of Railway Infrastructure Engineers. That's my view. It's not the view held by some, but it's mine, and that's what I'm arguing for. We can keep the logo. The logo, I'm not trying to destroy history completely, but I think to answer those 2 questions that people ask, or to rather prevent those questions, we need to rebrand ourselves. That's a sensitive thing to talk about, and there may be some in this room who think, don't want to do that really. I rather like the history and the name. Certainly I've met that in other places. So it needs handling sensitively, but it needs doing. And that's really where I am. And that here endeth the first lesson from today's talk. I wonder, does anyone want to ask any questions about that before we move on to the second?
Sorry, Peter, there's also people online. So if there's anyone online, could they raise their hands and potentially we'll call them out?
Okay. Did everyone online get that, Simon, saying if you've got a question, raise your hand and we'll pick it up? Any questions from the room? Yes, Gary.
I'll be one of those awful people who says more of a comment than a question, but you had the 3 USPs there. I would suggest there's a 4th, which is the journal. I mean, I've been getting the journal for a couple of years now, and as far as I'm aware, there's nothing else like it in the industry. It's the only place where every 3 months you can read real articles from real railway engineers with real technical depth as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a.
I think that's a really helpful comment, Gary.
And thinking of joining.
Yeah, and remember, if you join, you get that free every 3 months, and it's still currently on paper as well every 3 months. So, yeah, good.
Sorry,
yes, Sam.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I suppose potentially a tip, maybe, Peter, rather than a question. Mm-hmm. The IMechE, the IET, the ICE, they tend to catch people in university. I remember sitting through various presentations. The PWI haven't possibly got that because obviously while you're going to the university, you don't really know that you're going to go and work for the railway. But what is there that's being done, say, at early careers events for, say, apprentices or new trainees or things like that?
Well, Sam, you're absolutely right. The problem statement of that is that because of the existing infrastructure of communication from those other institutions into the universities, they tend to get their message that if you're studying mechanical engineering, you want to join the IMechE. If you're studying electrical engineering, you want to join the IET. If you're blah, 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 blah. And they have a lot of history and a lot of processes in place to do that. there is a recognition in the PWI that's not good enough. And Joan Heary, who is now our membership secretary, along with Phil Ransom, who some of you might know that name, are building relationships, first of all, with the universities who have railway courses specifically. And we're putting that same infrastructure insofar as we can in place for the PWI to be in those universities. I have a fairly useful thing that I can do. I can, at the board meetings, nominate people for invitation to fellowship of the institution. I am inviting the deans and senior lecturers and professors at all of those railway universities to join PWI at my cost for the first year. Getting them on board in that way will give us an inroad into those universities. And the curious thing about academics is that there are very few of them who are registered with any of the professional institutions because they have to pay for it themselves, unlike people in industry who tend in a lot of places to be able to get their company to fund the membership. Academics don't. So you find that some of the most able professors in the country who, you know, we all kind of bow down to in terms of their technical expertise are not members of any institution at all. Well, some of them are now, and more of them are joining as I work my way through. So we are trying to address that. One of the PWI's, I'll call it a problem, but I don't really mean that, challenge is perhaps a better way of putting this, is that the majority of what we do as an institution is done by volunteers. I don't get paid to do the presidential role. There are about 8 people who are on the salary of PWI. Everyone else is a volunteer. We just do stuff. I'm not complaining about that. That's not a whinge. But it's rather different to the IMECE, ICE and IET, who have membership teams and publicity departments who can do all that stuff. So again, building a bigger PWI in terms of membership and therefore a bigger revenue income will help us to address that problem even more. But we are dealing with it in the way that we can with those institutions. Yep, it's a good point. Anyone else? No one online? Shall we move on to part 2? Are there any adverts in between? So, okay. I thought I'd bring this presentation to you. As a bit of background, one of the things that I'm engaged in is that I jointly chair something called the National Electrification Efficiency Panel. I jointly chair that with Professor Andrew McNaughton, who some of you will know of, or maybe even know. That panel was set up around the time that TDNS report was published by Network Rail. The recognition being that the costs of electrification were not sustainable. CP5 had seen some particularly bad performance in terms of cost and delivery of electrification in the UK. We're actually in a room very close to the worst bad actor of all, Great Western. Great Western had cost somewhere in the region of £4.2 million per STK to get to Swindon and dropped to a much cheaper £2.7 million per STK beyond Swindon. In Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, those well-known cheap economies and places of very, very illiberal provision for workers, Yeah, they're really right-wing in Denmark and Switzerland and Germany, aren't they? They really do suppress their workers and keep them working on slave labour rates. They have poor safety, don't they? Because they've got less legislation affecting them in the European Union than we have, don't they? So you'd expect to find that in Germany, Switzerland and Denmark, that the rates would be similar to ours, wouldn't you? Below 1 million in Switzerland. Just above 1.2 million in Germany. And in Denmark, they appear to be delivering for about 980k. 4 million in the UK. What's wrong is the question. Well, that's what NEAT was convened to actually examine and come up with some recommendations to change. Now, this presentation that I've got here will allow me to touch on some of that and to embellish it a bit. The presentation was actually given to the capital investment team on Eastern Region about a month and a bit ago, where they asked me to come along and open their gathering in York to talk about that, the future of electrification. And what I want to do is just take you through this, and I'll expand on some of the issues as we go through and try not to bore you to death by doing it, if that's all right. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, boringly, I'm going to talk about cost and value. And I don't really apologise for that, but it's boring for me as well, because I've been talking about this since 2005. And our industry, and that bear in mind that in 2005 or just beyond it, I was Network Rail's head of network electrification, talking to the industry about what we were hoping to do for the industry. I've been talking about this since then. For many of you, this will be boring because you'd much rather talk about the nuts and bolts and washers and the engineering stuff, which I would rather be talking about as well. But there's no point in talking about that, and you'll understand why in a minute. I will get to some engineering issues and the role of engineers more importantly, but first, question, will there be future electrification? Well, my view is that unless there's a radical and fundamental change in the cost profile in the UK, the answer is emphatically no. No. I sit with DFT advisors and DFT politicians, not every day of the week, I'm not their best buddy. There was a point in time a little while ago where I wondered if I was going to be the next resident at 10 Downing Street because I was around at the time. I just wondered if that was, we were all taking turns. But I know that what they tell me very clearly is that they need to see positive trajectory to get the cost of electrification under control, because they're not prepared to see the sort of overspend disasters that CP5 delivered. They just won't support it. The advisors are not advising government to support it, and therefore government are not going to support it. Our costs are not marginally too great. I've already explained that to you. They're substantially too great. Our economy, if it's not obvious to you yet from what you hear in the press, let me break this news to you gently. Our economy's buggered. We are not going to be able to carry on the way we've been going. It's not the railway that's buggered, it's our economy. The whole economy of the nation. So the railway is bound to feel the cold wind of that. And we're not at the front of the queue. Do I want us to be at the front of the queue? I'm 70. I'm likely to need geriatric care. Perhaps I already need it. Who knows? But I want the NHS to be able to do that. When I eventually have a stroke or whatever it is that happens to me in the future, I don't want to be sitting in an ambulance for 8 hours outside waiting for people to come and get me in. I want all that put right. means that the railway is not at the front of the queue for money. You will have your own view of what's at the front of the queue, but it certainly isn't the railway. There's another issue in there, isn't there? Tiny, teensy little issue about climate. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. CP5 was a calamity for railway electrification. At the start of CP5, I was cock a hoop. My proposals to the DFT for Great Western, Transpennine, GOB, Egypt, MML had all been taken on board. They approved Northwest electrification. They approved Great Western. They approved all this stuff. We got on with it. And what did we do? We ballsed it up. We absolutely ballsed it up. I'm not criticising the electric service on Great Western by saying that. That's not the point. We cost too much, we ran too late, and we made it look like hard work. It was a calamity because it's painted a picture in the minds of our investors. Let's not just call them funders, investors, DFT, that they don't want to give us money because we can't be trusted with it. We go and spend it down the pub. We don't actually do the job. We do all sorts of stuff that's not necessary and we don't deliver. Crikey. What we proved is that electrification's unaffordable. So somehow we have to turn no into yes to give electrification a future at all. That's not a mean small point at all. Gary's team here are working on Midland Main Line and will know that whilst there are stages of Midland Main Line that have been funded, a lot of it ain't funded yet. There's no authority to get work done beyond Trent Valley, really, nothing. It won't come unless we address these problems. Network Rail is the most expensive railway in Europe for capital works. I gave this message in front of Rob McIntosh. He's the Regional Managing Director of Eastern, in front of Rob Cairns. He's the Capital Investment Director for Eastern Region. In front of Andrew Murray, he's the Dean, Eastern Region. The most expensive in Europe. There are major issues about project management and contractual frameworks. Let me illustrate this. The Transpennine route upgrade is 75 miles in length from Manchester through Leeds to York. 75 miles of railway. It kicked off as a project in 2009. It kicked off as a project in 2009. It was not until 2018 that any shovels went in the ground. By 2018, they had spent £750 million on feasibility reports, initial outline designs, sitting around talking about it, thinking about it, having strong tea or whatever it was they were doing. They certainly weren't doing anything to the infrastructure. That's a bit damning. They're just getting on with it now. And do you know how much it's going to cost? Anyone like to guess? How many digits do you think?
North of 10 billion, isn't it?
North of 10 billion. That's right. North of 10 billion pounds. There's all sorts of things wrong in there. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But there are also major issues around the cost of safety assurance processes. In the building just over the way here, whichever direction it's in, SN1, during the GWEP, you'll remember GWEP, so will Gary. Some others among you will remember GWEP as well. there were just over 320 people in that office. A good proportion of those were about assurance. Gilles was in amongst them for a lot of the time. What was produced was a mass of information and documentation that eventually got sent to the ORR to get approval to enter service. You will remember, Gilles, the scramble up to Christmas 2019 to get to Cardiff. Was it 19 or 18? Can't remember which year it was. It was 20, say. It was sent to the ORR on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, couldn't fit on 3 discs because we were sending it on discs. There was nearly 3 terabytes in total of information. And the proposition was that we're sending you this on Christmas Eve and we want you to review it so we can enter service on the 2nd of January.
Christmas.
Wow. That is speed reading, isn't it? Assuming that you're going to take 20 minutes off on Christmas afternoon to watch the Queen, God bless her, you don't really have a lot of time to read 3 terabytes of information, do you? So what value was that, really? I have some concerns about what this benefit is, because I'm not sure how many hostages to fortune exist in there at the time of some accident in the future. Stuff that's in there that creates a hostage. Look, can I tell you about my experience in France? I worked for SNCF at one point, SNCF Sistra, and they got me across to France and the run-up to implementing Tour Bordeaux. That's a TGV route. It's bloody long, 380 kilometres of brand new railway, everything new. And they were going through the same process because they're subject to exactly the same laws and rules that we have. They have a regulator. They don't call it the ORR, but they have a regulator. So the submission had to go to them. The submission for that whole new TGV railway was 4 pages long. It was a letter from SNCF, and it said, I'll paraphrase it, and I won't say it in French. That's because I don't speak French, so I won't do that. What it said was, we built this railway to SNCF standards. We've examined the work that's been done and confirm it's in accordance with SNCF standards. There will be some defects which we will solve pre and post entry into service. And they sent that letter, signed Guillaume Pepe, Chief Executive of SNCF, to their regulator 3 months before the thing went into service. 2 weeks later, they got a reply from their regulator that said, thank you very much. We look forward to being invited onto the first train. Stop. There you go. Why do the English invent so many ways to make a mess of everything on their own? You must see that from a French perspective, surely. We are not very good at that. We really are not very good at that. And we have a very bad relationship with our regulator as a result. And Gary had the dubious privilege of sitting through a meeting with me in York a week or so back with the regulator trying to unscramble some of that. There are major issues about access time to achieve a production environment. Here we go, Great Western. Do you remember the first bit? Sam, you'll remember this. We had the stupidity, I'll put it that way, because I think that's what it was, of insisting that the only thing we were interested in from the piling gang was how many piles they could come back and tell us they put in each night. More piles in the ground each night was good, less piles, not good. And so the behaviour was incentivised. Well, those ones that 20 miles that way are easy. We're going to put 10 of them in, we get a tick in the box. Wait a minute, the 10 in the middle of the first section to be wide are pretty difficult, really. We'll leave them till later, because that's not going to get us a tick in the box. We won't get them all in one night. And so we ended up in a bizarre situation where we couldn't put the steel up for any one whole wire run for weeks. Eventually it started to get better, but those behaviours, which are, you know, I'll say this cynically, are just naive and stupid, actually prevailed. I know you got frustrated with it, Sam. It was daft. Electrification is a production issue, and we have to have a production environment to build. A production manager in a BMW factory, like the one down the road here, does not work to a project plan with drop dead dates. It works to a planned efficiency of delivery. He says that if a car is held up on the production line, that's a disaster. That's not a drop dead date. It's the hold up on the production line that's a. We run this as a project with promised dates, which we fail to deliver, then make excuses about the failure and move on. It's a production activity and should be run as such. So I am saying that unchanged, the NR culture that brings all that stuff about won't move away from those behaviours, and they cause the issues and will prevent no from turning to yes. So what's the role of the engineer? And this is the bit that I kind of thought I'd talk about here today. Well, I was privileged to work for Alan Goldfinch, and he was my mentor many years ago. Alan Goldfinch was the CM&EE Eastern Region. He was a tremendous guy, tremendously experienced, very clever man, much cleverer than me. And he told me this thing, which is a cliche that you possibly heard before. But he told me an engineer is a man. Remember, diversity wasn't an issue back when I was young. So an engineer was a man who can do for 10 shillings. Most of you are too young to remember what shillings are. 10 shillings is 50 pence. What any idiot can do for £1. An engineer can do for 50p what any idiot can do for £1. I think that's pretty profoundly true, actually. I think I've watched idiots doing stuff and spending £3 when 50p would have done. And that annoys me when I see that. Second thing he taught me, an engineer knows the boundaries of his own knowledge. So we all get tempted to opine, to give opinions about stuff, which perhaps are stretching beyond the boundaries of our certain knowledge. We should be wise to that, and we should know those boundaries, and we should debate those issues with our peers. So when you're at the boundary of your knowledge, find somebody who is an engineer and a peer to discuss that with. You're not on your own. Countless engineers, if somebody rings me up and says, I've got this interesting issue, I don't understand it, that would divert me from anything else that I'm doing that's whatever might be exciting me, because I love having that debate with people. But an engineer is confident enough to sometimes say no and articulate why. Within the organisations that we currently see, the engineers are often disempowered. They're left as being a necessary evil, really, that people have to have somebody over there who they can quote as an engineer, but I don't really want to listen to him. He's an idiot. I just want him there as a token thing. Well, you have to be able to say no. Just think about this. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but Hatfield. The big accident at Hatfield, gauge corner cracking, leads train, breaks the rail, comes off the track, 4 people killed. The railway goes into the meltdown because gauge corner cracking isn't being dealt with. Forget the facts of the issue. 5 really competent engineers, 4 of whom were well known to me as colleagues, had their careers ruined by that incident because they were held up as having acquiesced to the pressure from the commercial and management teams in the industry who would not give them access to the railway to change the rail strings that they knew were failing. The rails were in the forefoot, waiting to be put in, but they couldn't have a possession to do the job. All 5 of those people ended up with ruined careers, out of the industry. One of them had a really serious breakdown as a result. They were in court. There's something wrong with the balance there, that if you've got the accountability, you must have the responsibility with it, which means they should have had the authority recognised to block the road and do the work. They weren't accorded that. There's something wrong with that. And you have to make yourself unpopular. Gary and I were talking about this a little earlier, actually. There are times when you have to find a way diplomatically of saying, no, I'm not going to support that. If you want to do that, go on. It's your responsibility, though, once you do it. I'm telling you, you shouldn't. That's the best you can do. You can't overrule the CEO of a company, but you can tell him that you're not carrying his responsibility and accountability. I don't think the engineers are accorded that standing in Network Rail. I am clear on that, and I tell people that all the time. Engineers need to be listened to. So what must we do? Well, back to my silly thing. We should always be looking for the 50p solution. The pound solution is lazy and it's bad engineering. It's not engineering in my view. If there's an option of having a pile that's this long or one that's 4 times as long, and the comfort zone is if I put one 4 times as long, I know it's never going to fail this side of Armageddon. Well, that's not what you're paid to do. You're paid to judge whether this one will do the job. And if it will, that's what you use. Just one example. You need to look beyond the boundaries of your knowledge and engage with your peers and more experienced people. No individual has all the answers to everything. And the way you get to the best answer possible is by discussing with other people. So be prepared to have a little humility and recognise, I don't know. I'd like a bit of advice. I want to talk to some people. Maybe they can help. I think that's an important role for engineers because you do know the questions even if you don't know the answers. That's important. And we need to work together with project managers and project directors as equals. That is pretty much about a behavioural issue. The dominance of project managers within a project team is an illusion created by project managers. You have to be, the American expression is you have to grow a pair sometimes. You have to stand up to people who are doing the wrong thing. As you move up through the engineering hierarchy and you get to the point where in a project you're the CRE or you're the project engineer, the principal engineer on the job. The project manager cannot tell you what to do. Project manager cannot tell you what to do in engineering terms because all you've got to say to him is, mate, you're not qualified, go away. Which is some conversations that I had in that building across the way there over the months in the job I was doing on Great Western to help. It's an illusion. Don't fall victim to the illusion because you make yourself the victim if you do. You are disempowering yourself if you think he's the boss. He carries responsibilities, yes, but so do you as an engineer, and he can't carry yours. So let's move on and just sort of sum this up a bit, and then we can have a bit of a debate. I'd like to debate with you. What do you think? Light BR electrification schemes. I was privileged to be part of those. The late schemes were Anglia, Ayrshire Coast, ECML, and we were the envy of the world. We had visitors from Japan, from France, from Germany and other places coming across here to say, we don't understand how you managed to deliver this at this cost. How did you do that? The real big one at the end was ECML. I was the electrification engineer at ECML at the end of it, and I'm really, really proud of what we did there. Project director, Don Heath, in his completion report for ECML, headlined that report in big letters, 1 year early and under budget. Very next time we, in Network Rail era, deliver a project on time and at budget, will be the first. We have an endemic approach that accepts late delivery and overspend and finds every way to find excuses for it in the process of it actually manifesting, instead of managing it out so that we do that. Now, I've often heard people say, oh, ECML electrification, but it was done on the cheap, wasn't it? Aluminium catenary, headspan construction, it's done on the cheap. It was easy when you did it because you were using a cheap way of doing it. Well, what I say to people who tell me that is that in CP5, you demonstrably tried the alternative. Was it better? How's that going for you? Cheap is not something to be disparaging about. Cheap is a good thing. It means less expensive. It means affordable. So I don't accept that that is a reasonable comment to make. So here's another bit of this. And bear in mind, I was talking to Eastern Region about this, the senior team in Eastern Region included. What must the whole organisation do? Well, this is a top-down issue. From the top down, the culture change must be driven. I don't see top-down pressure to contain costs. I really don't. I don't see the exec of Network Rail saying to the regions, you cost too much, mate, go away and get the cost down. I don't see the regions saying to big projects, come off it, get the cost down. I don't see that driven hard enough. I am particularly critical about how Network Rail has applied benchmarking. The benchmarking that Network Rail has done is to take a basket of Network Rail CP5 projects and find the mean value and say that's our benchmark target. So in context, here's a chart that starts at the bottom and works up. Most of Europe stops about there. Then there's this population of Network Rail projects, and we've set our benchmark in the middle of that. Hence, you will find people who say, well, we're under 2.5, that's all right. 2.5 million per SDK, that's brilliant. We've got it down to 2.5, at estimate. When was the last project that ever delivered at estimate? Benchmarking is too weak in its approach. And I've had that conversation in the DFT as well. That point. The challenge is to benchmark against the best in class. I am trying to drag a number of senior people in Network Rail over to Denmark. Denmark are building 1,750 kilometres of route electrification, so that's probably double that number of SDKs. And they're running at just under £1 million per SDK. And they're on time and they're delivering apparently quite happily. I want to go and see what they're doing. I want to drag Network Rail people over there to see what they're doing, because I think we can learn from them. We should be benchmarking against the best, not the worst. An SDK rate of electrification is deliverable at that 1 million. At present, SDK rates in Network Rail are north of 2. That's sad, isn't it? Right, so the summary. 25 kV overhead electrification is the only technology available to deliver a response to climate change. I get bounced at me quite frequently. Oh, well, we can use batteries to move the trains. Well, you can, providing you don't mind them stopping in Swindon for 3 hours to recharge before they go on to Bristol. Oh, they go, well, batteries will improve, they'll get better. Electrification costs will improve, it will get better. You're going to back that? Oh, no. So you're going to back a technology delivery that is uncertain above what you already know. That's clever. That's brilliant. Then comes the challenge, well, we just use hydrogen. Most people who advocate using hydrogen think that hydrogen grows on trees. I've actually seen and heard people say we need to go and look for hydrogen resources to mine. The person who said that was in the Department for Transport.
I figured.
Hydrogen, for those who aren't aware in the room, is not available in its pure form on Earth anywhere. We have to make it. In its pure form, you can make it in a few ways, but they all take energy. They take about 5 times as much energy to make as is embedded in the hydrogen that comes off the production line. So for every watt of useful power that you're going to use in your end effect, whatever that is, a train, a plane, a boat, whatever, it costs you 5 times that electrical energy to make that unit of hydrogen. If one assumes that where you're making it and where you're using it are on land, wouldn't it be easier to put a wire, it's a bit novel this, it's a bit radical, a wire between the generator and the place where you want the energy and use electricity straight away? Does that not make sense? I don't know, it doesn't to some people. And in any case, we will need hydrogen as a society, not as a railway. We need hydrogen not for domestic use, not for transport, well, for some transport. We need it, first of all, for the big heavy industries that use heat, cement, steel, all of those things, big furnaces and things where we burn stuff. That's where we need hydrogen. And the demand for that will grow faster than the amount that we can make. So there's a question, will there be any over for transport? Well, there needs to be, because international shipping doesn't have another option. And as it happens, the ships can manage to carry the bulk volume of the hydrogen that they need to make a journey. So abandoning diesel, which is the biggest polluter on the planet from shipping, relies on us having green hydrogen. The air industry looks as if it will rely on hydrogen also. So if you assume that the big fired industries, concrete, steel, need the hydrogen, boats, ships, international container traffic need the hydrogen, international air travel needs the hydrogen. There's not much left for anyone else beyond until later on this century, probably into next, even if we ever get the production up to that rate. So if we can't do batteries and we can't do hydrogen, that leaves us with fairy dust if we're going to avoid electrifying railway routes. The TDNS study showed that we need to electrify at least 11,000 kilometres of railway in this country to keep services running in a zero carbon economy. It could be more because some of the other routes rely on batteries and hydrogen to make them work. So as the technology pans out across the next 30 years, 11,000 could become 15. We've got a lot of electrification to do. Here's my point about the railway. if we don't make this happen, make all that happen, we won't be able to electrify some of those key routes because we won't get the funding to do it. If we don't electrify them by 2050, cost of running them on diesel, which is where we'll be stuck, will be coming out of our net zero balance. So we have to do something to get to net zero with that diesel traffic still running. But net zero isn't the end of the journey. The end of the journey is zero. So I don't know when zero will actually occur. It's impossible to say, isn't it? But if we say that at 2050 it's net zero and we're towards complete zero by 2100, in that 50 years from 2050, if we don't have a solution for those other bits of railway, they'll close. Because the only way to make them zero is to stop running trains on them. So there's an existential threat in there for parts of our railway. If we don't solve the cost of electrification, we will get to that point. And the thing is, that was the message that I dwelt upon with the Eastern Region Group. Leadership and relentless pursuit of the goal is the missing ingredient. That I don't see in Network Rail. That I think is missing in our industry. And that's what I'm advocating we should be looking to do. It's a cheerful message, isn't it? I'm glad I didn't give you this in the new year. We can do this. The UK once led the world, and we can do it again. But future electrification depends on what it says there, applying the lessons from the past. And that requires this and future generations to listen to us senior citizens and just react to this, or to put that another way. If you've been listening, thank you very much. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter.
Do you want to ask people on the call if they want to raise their hands as well?
Yeah, are there any questions in the room for?
Yes, Sam.
And it leads a little bit. I've done a talk myself where I've asked this question to the room, and it leads basically from what your last point was. Who do you think is leading electrification in the UK? Can you name that first?
No. No, Sam, I can't.
Do you think that's a problem?
Yes, I think that is a dreadful problem. I think unless any human society relies upon a process of escalation to resolve conflict, down in the playground, if you like, the kids are squabbling all the time. And they either sort that out by fisticuffs amongst themselves or not. But when they can't get to a solution, they go to the next level up, where there's, instead of 100 people, there's 10 or whatever the number is. And whichever one of those 10 those people refer to, he says what to do. Well, if the 10 are in conflict as well, then they go up and up. And eventually it has to get to one person who says, and if you think about our legal system, eventually 12 good men true sit and judge an issue, but then finally the person who says what's going to happen about that judgment, guilt or innocent, is the judge. One person, one. And there has to be, and again, something that I'm advocating to Network Rail, certainly to the DFT as well, is that there has to be one person who leads this. Must be. Difficult, it needs doing. Yeah. Questions, anyone? Yes.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, but in my experience, what I've seen is just a cultural shift away from decision making, putting off awkward decisions, decision by spreadsheet, decision by committee, and this is This is not the railway industry. This is the whole country, everywhere. So what you're proposing, or I fully support it. Do you not feel that, in a sense, you're swimming against the prevailing cultural tide?
Yeah. Yes, is the answer. All the time, I feel as if I'm swimming against the prevailing cultural tide, but below it. I nearly swore again. I don't care. I am going to carry on swimming against it, because if somebody doesn't raise a voice to say, stop this, I've got children and grandchildren now who are going to, hopefully, live through this century and into next. If this century's end brings a 50-degree plus temperature across the UK, I don't envy them that experience. We have to arrest climate change. I can't make that happen everywhere, but I can bloody well make sure the railway lives up to its, or at least understands what it must do to live up to that challenge. Yeah, so no, it's not easy. It's not easy. And do I find people listening all the time? I find what I'm sensing in this room, that everyone in here recognises this is right, but we all feel powerless to actually make the changes that need to be made. Well, yeah, of course. That's an issue, and it's an issue around the world. I mean, we're watching it play out in China, aren't we, in many respects? This isn't about climate change in China, but what we're seeing is an authoritarian government in China which seems to be running amok, off in a direction that's not to the liking of the people who they govern. Well, the people are now standing up and carrying blank sheets of paper around to make clear that they're not doing the right job. Well, metaphorically, I'm not suggesting we go out on the streets, but within the rail industry, we've got to keep that pressure on. We've got to keep talking to whoever will listen and say, this needs to change. Sorry, I'm lecturing now.
No. That's a very courageous stance.
Okay, I think we're just coming to the end of time, Peter, unfortunately. I think there was at least one question online. But
Okay.
maybe we'll pick it up later if that's all right with you.
Yes, of course.
So I'll ask Simon to propose a vote of thanks, please.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, for coming. If we give Peter show him our normal method of thanks with a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Use that
Oh,
to
can
close
I?
the meeting.
A bit of a dream. So thank